Hello and welcome to the regular Friday night Wisdom Factory community video time. Hangout on air, being technical. And we try to talk about something each week that may be of interest to other people who have a background in integral or who came to us through the Superhuman Operating System audience. And today I'm talking to a little hole here next to my wife who's busy fiddling with things. And this is Heidi here, by the way.
Yeah.
And I'm Mark. Okay.
And this is Sunny.
Yeah. All right.
Clawing me.
And
okay.
We're starting to talk about lines of intelligence or lines of development. I'm not sure which is the best way to put that. And that was Lucky from the outside having his. As you can see, this is more informal event than some of the things we put on. And we were wondering, well, I know what lines of development I kind of like to talk about, but it doesn't mean other people do. So we asked...
Who are the other peoples?
Who are the...
The ones who are visible, at least.
The ones that we can see is our old friend Scott Marshall.
Hello.
And our almost as old friend Lawrence Gold.
Are they really so old?
Oh,
elderly.
Especially Lawrence. Especially Lawrence, yeah. But anyway.
So
no, I think we're the oldest ones here.
Yeah.
I'm the oldest. Yeah.
Not by
somebody
much.
Somebody called me an elder today. It sounded so much better than older, But anyway. So, what line of intelligence, what line of development, in Wilbur's terms, or related developmental folks? A lot of people have different lines listed. What interests us to talk about tonight?
I thought as we are doing this Gold Key release training with Lawrence, to explore a little bit what these how can I say that? For what lines these things are useful, this training which you are offering. So
what lines of intelligence are useful for...
No, the other way around. His procedures, for what lines they are useful to grow up in these lines.
Oh.
But it was so difficult to get out today. I don't know why.
Yeah. Well, I hope they understood it anyway. So
more or less.
More or less, okay.
I think what your question to answer what lines are not served.
Musical line.
Well, no, I don't think so, because the origin of music is intuition.
Yeah, and also it is by the sound of your words, so they have an influence, no? How you speak it, how we hear it. So maybe not, no?
I don't know if there could be anything that would be outside it, because the Gold Key release is built upon the tetraseed, attention, intention, memory, and imagination, which is the deep structure of everything. And now I say it might be easier to find an exception. Let's see if we can start with one.
One exception?
One. Let's see if we can find one exception.
Well, some of that's kind of arbitrary, though, because all these developmental pioneers, etc., have their own, set of lines that they're fond of, and it's not really a hard classification. There's a degree of granularity about them. Some have half a dozen, and some have 16, 20, 25. So, in some respects, people invent or discover new lines of intelligence, or it's a very fluid field. I don't know.
But they are always talking about the main lines of intelligence, which would be, for instance, cognitive, kinesthetic,
yes,
What else?
See?
Mathematical, musical,
Mathematical, yeah, musical.
and real estate.
Oh, the real estate line.
The governing principle of that is inflation.
Yeah. But the aesthetic line, for instance, and the moral line.
Sure. Yeah. And people talk about spiritual intelligence.
Spiritual
too.
line, yeah. Emotional line.
Emotional? What do you mean?
Emotional intelligence, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So.
Social intelligence.
Yeah.
Yes, I heard about that once.
Yeah.
Long time ago.
Don't worry about it.
I don't know anything.
Okay.
Sexual intelligence.
Right.
Well, I think that's largely emotional. Sexual intelligence? What do you think?
Can also be relational intelligence. I would call that relational intelligence.
So these overlap. You can divide the world up differently. Let's put it.
Yes.
But social intelligence and relational intelligence, they are sort of social intelligence for me is
more general.
It's more general. Relational is more like this, and sexual is even less. Less complex. No, not complex, but like included in that. No. The bigger circle is social. The smaller is intelligence, and the small one is the.
Well, it's a lot bigger for me, damn it. Yeah.
You are man.
Yeah. Okay.
And there we have it.
Yeah.
These men, I can only say. Okay. Now they have invented Viagra for women, I have read. So.
And it doesn't work, but they're still going to sell it. It still was approved.
Anything for a buck.
I know that's with an F. It's with an F. Yeah.
Quite so, quite so.
Yeah.
Anything for a buff.
Yeah. Exactly. So.
Here's another line. Humor. There's got to be humor as a line of intelligence.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I agree with that. Mark, you said you wanted to talk about certain lines. I was wondering what the lines you wanted to talk about.
Oh, I was going to be sort of a scholarly in the mud sort of thing, cognitive line there, you know. The one that I got such nice scores on my IQ tests back in high school, you know, etc. But, of course, cognitive doesn't just mean that sort of intelligence, but it's sort of the basic, in some ways, the necessary but not sufficient line of intelligence. Yeah. It just measures what one can be aware of in some regard. You know, without cognitive intelligence, I suppose some of these others can be developed to some great degree too. But you'd be a very lopsided person. You know, I'm thinking of. You know, they don't say idiot savants anymore. They say savants. You know, I had.
Well, that was a stupid development.
Yeah. Idiotic, I'd say.
No, because look, savant is somebody, as I understand. Really, I understand that a savant is simply somebody who's exceptionally competent or able in a certain dimension.
Yeah.
And the idiot savants are those who are not just competent in a special place, but are incompetent in others in which one would expect them to be competent. So I think the idiot part should be kept to distinguish them from people who are just extremely brilliant, like so many of us.
Oh, I think autistic, it's politically incorrect.
Politically incorrect. But I have a saying: political correctness is incorrect.
That's true. But I did have an uncle. My mother had a brother who was quite slow, quite limited in what he was good at. What he was good at was baseball statistics. He knew every year, everybody on the roster, what their record was, and it wasn't just for the current year. As far back as he could remember, he knew every little tit and jottle of all of these baseball statistics. And there's nothing else he ever wanted to talk about. Yeah. which made for some very sleepy Sunday afternoons.
I'm getting sleepy just hearing about it.
Well, I'll change the subject quickly, but that's he was not high in cognitive intelligence.
Mhm.
But what intelligence is that when you can remember so many things, but only on a let's say limited?
The baseball statistics
Topics.
line of development.
Yeah, okay.
Which is related to real estate.
Yeah, I tend to think of it like the autistic kind of mind, where in autism, because I've worked with a lot of autistic children, they develop obsessions with one particular fascinating thing. One of my students was really into the periodic table of elements, and he knew every single element that was on there, and he could tell you the atomic number and some of the unknown man-made elements. He could just recount, but he would go from one really deep obsession to the next. So then he would go to the Greek gods or to the planets or things like that.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, so there was some integration that was missing in the way his mind worked. He couldn't put together a complete picture of things, a balanced picture. Somehow.
Yeah, he needed to work on his interpersonal skills. So a lot of what we did was to develop or flex the muscle for understanding other people's points of view. So that was basically, he was so smart everywhere else, school was kind of boring to him that way, where he knew a lot of things mentally, but he wasn't very evolved interpersonally, so he needed to build those skills and mirroring and mirror neurons and all that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, could his intelligence be helpful in learning those skills?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Good.
First, I want to interrupt and say hello to Lowell. Oh, there is an echo in your part, I think.
Lowell.
Can you? Okay. Can you hear us?
She's not hearing us, I guess.
Okay.
Yes, I am.
Oh,
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit disturbed, your audio. A little bit.
Yeah, I'm getting your transmission is coming in kind of choppy as well.
So put earbuds in. I think this can help.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, go on until she has them.
Well, I'm not sure where I was actually. About you were talking about
fixations, Mark.
Fixations.
Yeah, where someone, instead of being developed in more than one line, like the typical brain or the typical individual can be developed in more than one area. We were talking about savants and or autistic people who are very, very talented on the piano, or I always think of Rain Man, where they can count numbers and things like that, but have very difficult time socially and take everything literally and have a trouble understanding metaphor or things like that.
So what we are wanting to say is that before we talked about the levels of development, and it seemed that a person is at one level, we sort of talked about it in this way. But what we are now saying, that's not so. That in the person there are several intelligences between 10 and who knows how many, and some might be at the highest level, even much, much, much higher as the medium, and the other might be not developed at all. No.
And Lowell, that's a little tiny introduction to what we've been talking about, and we should probably let people know about Lowell too.
Yeah,
she is in.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Would you like to say
good morning?
Yeah.
I'm not sure where I've tried to make the adjustments here that go with the headset, and
You sound great.
the adjustments aren't happening.
Oh.
They're coming through the way I had it set, despite the fact that I've made the adjustments.
For us, it's better. We hear you much better.
Yeah.
Do you?
On our end, it's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe the mic is working okay, but your sound is not coming through the. So that's okay. I'll just put this down here and let it go.
Okay.
Okay.
So I was just enticed on your topic. I mean, very, very interested in AQAL. But when we speak about all these different intelligences, it really brought something up for me. And this is some pretty raw self-disclosure going to happen here. But as a child, both my brother and my father called me stupid a lot. So the whole thing about intelligence throughout my school experience was a very unpleasant and experience for me, and because in those early days, pretty much all that was ever spoken about was the cognitive part, and I mean, I eventually learned that, yeah, I'm not stupid, and went to university and did all of those things. But what a liberation it was for me to read about all these other intelligences and how, how some of those become even more important than that thing that got emphasized in our early school years. And so, and I guess the other piece about it is how all of these intelligences, I mean, I wrote them all down that you were sort of saying. And I mean, to be a really balanced person, we need to have a little bit of all of that. And, I mean, it just goes to show how I think this study of human behavior and humans has progressed so much since I was reacting to all of that in the in my early days. So. Anyway, that's my story.
Yeah, thank you for sharing.
So there's a line of development to intelligence itself.
Absolutely.
That's great. That's wonderful.
I'm thinking back when I was young and to university. I mean, when did the book Emotional Intelligence come out? It's 30 years or something, 35 years. And before it was only IQ. You need to be intelligent. And then they found out that when you are, I can also tell a story. In my class, when I had maturita, what is this?
When you graduated.
Graduated from school, I was the third of 40 people. And who was before me, he did quite a good career. But who was the very, very best of the school? He never finished his university studies, and he never made a living out of a decent thing. He just didn't get it. And I mean, I was not so super successful in doing a traditional career, at least. I did my own stuff, the singing, teaching, and quite a bit of housewife in between. So it is not the IQ who guarantees that you have a wonderful life. And studies shows that it's not the case. That most people who have very high IQ, as we talked before, often have a really shortcoming on the other part, on some other part, which doesn't allow them to function in life. Maybe in the mathematical things there, no?
Well, I could confess, that because I had a really good IQ, boy, and I figured I had it made. I couldn't do any wrong. I didn't have to do anything else. That was it. That was my ticket. It didn't work out that way, but that was a slow come down to realize that just being really bright wasn't going to be enough.
This was the era of the whole culture.
Sure.
That we thought that would be
the can-do boys. Yeah, Robert McNamara and Johnson's cabinet in Vietnam. Yeah.
I think another piece, Heidi, that you kind of alluded to when you look back at the people you went to school with and so forth, I think that we all develop at a different rate. And so I remember as you were saying, some people that I went to high school that were highly developed socially, for example, and in many other ways in high school, but as life went on, other people surpassed them. And so I always found that kind of interesting, and that maybe as human beings, all these intelligences develop at varying rates, and so that's what makes us human, isn't it?
I would immediately come to my mind comes the gender thing. We women are more developed, let's say, or more hardwired for relationship intelligence. It's not that we are very good in it always, but at least we have more the bias to that one, and probably for us it's easier to learn to become better in relationships than probably it is for men. I do believe that.
Yeah.
Why for us it's much more difficult to learn to go bang one way and do what, even if after a year or so I have understood that's not the right way, but now I'm on the road, I have to go. This is for women much more difficult. While men go until, suicide, more or less, This is what wars are.
Well, and one of here's as you're saying this, something arises for me. What and maybe this is an intelligence. I don't know. I'd be interested to hear what you folks think. Change, the ability to adjust to change. Adjust to change and or embrace change. Do you think that's an intelligence?
I think so.
I think so, and it's probably part of cognitive intelligence, if we define cognitive intelligence as being able to be aware of things. So you can be sensitive to what's going on and respond, react. You have to notice it first. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like adaptability.
Mm-hmm.
Being able to adapt to changing circumstances, high stress environment, people that are in jobs where they have to make split-second decisions that often that have to do with saving people's lives. Like, I just think of EMTs or something like that, where they have to make decisions. Emergency people, medical people.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that you can develop that. And I come back to the gender thing. I believe that women are more comfortable for change because this is biologically ingrained. When women are pregnant, they never know what the next moment is and how it will be and what. You cannot really plan it. I mean, today they go then into hospital, but for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, you didn't know what comes. So you had, and even when the children were born, there were so many surprises. So we were sort of drilled to respond to what comes in the moment. But I don't think that this is in the same amount for men. I don't want to make too much the difference, but I do believe that there's a difference.
Different changes.
Well, I had a really interesting conversation yesterday. I went on one of those networking coffee dates, locally here, and the chap that I was meeting with, we've known each other for a long time and support one another in lots of ways, etc., etc. And I would guess that we're both about the same age, and both retired from kind of a main career into sort of self-employment or solo entrepreneurship and all of that. And we were discussing how so many people resist doing exactly what we're doing here right now. And what is it about that? And what is it about certain people that are are struggling with this whole technological age, and why is that, and what's happening? And the more we talked about it, the more we realized that there are people who really not only can adjust to change, but they really embrace it. And I couldn't help during the conversation kind of saying, oh, well, that would be an Enneagram's type 7. that we go into this whole thing about it really wanting to know what are the trends, and where are we going, and where's the potential in that, and all of that. So I mean, adjusting to change, adjustment is one thing, but really embracing it and going for it is another one. Maybe it's all on the same continuum. I don't know. So I mean, this conversation has raised that for me. What is this, an intelligence, or what is it?
What is it, Lawrence? I think you have an answer. I have to mute because of Dougie.
No, I'm sitting here pondering this matter of intelligences, and it seems that if we take any skill, we might find that it's composed of one or more intelligences. So it's easy. I'm joking earlier. I say real estate was an intelligence, but in a certain sense, let's just take that for a fun example. You have to have a social intelligence, a certain numerical intelligence to do that, an aesthetic intelligence. So it's starting to look a little to me like herding cats in terms of identifying intelligences. They seem to go every which way in that, this way and that. And it might be helpful for us to go to the core of what constitutes an intelligence, so we can sift things out a bit.
I think you have an idea what may be at the core of intelligence.
Well, I have what's at the absolute core. Yeah, I've said it earlier, but one step of organization higher than that, and I'm talking about the tetraseed, that's the core of every intelligence. But if we're looking at other intelligence, say linguistic intelligence, it has to do with the feel for meaning and words. And there's spatial intelligence. Now, here's another one I said earlier, humor. Now, that is obviously a special intelligence of its own. You can't reduce humor to anything else. You can't reduce it to cognitive, because humor is paradoxical. It's not reasonable, right? It just hits you a certain way, either funny or not. Musical, another one. You can't reduce musical to social. Mathematical, you can't reduce it to anything else. You can't find, by subdividing it, parts. So it may be that a genuine intelligence is like a prime number. It only can be defined in terms of itself or oneness.
Well, that's a big difference.
This is a difference, yeah. So emotional intelligence would be an intelligence because you cannot reduce it. Spiritual intelligence then would be too, or can you read?
It would be, but spiritual is such a slippery word. So we would have to be very specific about whether we're talking about states.
I think so.
Or stages, or myths, or emotional enthusiasm, which some people call spiritual. That music was so spiritual, you know.
Yes, it made me feel so good. I just couldn't sit still. Yes,
then that's why it is spiritual.
That's right.
No, also there's certain sort of flair around it, which then is called spiritual. That's probably not what you mean with that.
Yeah.
And it's not states, because otherwise we wouldn't need it as a line. States,
well, there is the capacity to develop the ability to come awake, say, in dream states. That develops.
Lucid dreaming.
Lucid dreaming. So,
but what I think, this is still state experiences, but what would be the development in the line, that would be more how you see your state experience.
How you would interpret them.
Yeah, I think
how you would tell other people about them. Well, I saw Jesus Christ and he came to me personally. You know, if you're at a conventional level, that might be how you describe the event. But if you're at another level or another place, you know, it might be somebody with 8 arms, or it might be the spirit of the wolf, or whatever, or up higher, you know, completely different way of interpreting it.
What would you say, Scott and Lowell?
Yeah, I think what we're talking about is how like chameleon-ish certain lines of development or lines of intelligence are, and how some can fall into others and some seem to have their own particular kind of capacity. And the good news is that these lines are the important thing that I want to get across is that in typical schooling, certain lines of development are favored over others, like mathematical intelligence or scientific observation intelligence. Skills such as those are favored in school as opposed to emotional intelligence, even though I think these things are becoming more popular now or more prevalent now. When companies want an actual team environment, they're going to need people with emotional intelligence to be able to deal with each other and work together, solve problems. So, you know, we'll see what happens with all that kind of thing.
So I'm still chewing around here on whether some of them are prime or combos. I'm looking and saying, okay, yeah, I can. I was looking at social. It involved certainly emotional, maybe even linguistic in a sort of a way, cognitive. Yeah, it's. I'm still sorting this out.
Yeah, I think it's good to keep sorting. I don't think it's super important that you know we tease them all apart and look at them with a microscope. But I think some are, like we talked at length last chat all about creativity, which was a very fruitful discussion. And I just think you know, because we don't really teach creativity, even in the arts we teach, you know, formulaic skills. Creativity is not something that you can really learn in the sense of like in the same way you would math. Although in the higher level of mathematics, it's very creative in quantum physics, stuff that I have no idea about. That's why the spiritual line of intelligence is important, because you can be very spiritually advanced and not necessarily a genius at math, and that's the whole important point, that people, when they look at their spiritual teacher or their spiritual leader and think that he or she is completely developed and a perfect person, that's not the case. People are multidimensional, and just in that they may be very highly realized kind of person, but not being able to do math. They're not. You can't expect your guru to do advanced calculus or something like that. Maybe you could, but
mine better, damn it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's true. Of course, it's a classic, situation where the guru ends up being not very highly developed along the moral line.
Right.
That was the classic case.
Yeah. We don't need to mention any names, but we all know who we're talking about.
We could mention a bunch of them.
Yeah.
I would like to come back to this, that we don't need to figure out exactly which line is what and how they continue, but it is important to realize that so far our culture has preferred and certain lines and almost suppressed other lines, or at least ignored, and there was no official teaching in other lines. I mean, still it's not. It's a little bit better now, but really not as it could be for our understanding. So, and I think, Scott, in special teaching, what you did, there, I think they are forced to introduce the other lines, because otherwise you don't reach the people.
Yeah, definitely. And that's a whole art form in and of itself, the special needs population, where there's so many different kinds of areas in a person where you could say their consciousness splinters off. There could be early traumas. There could be stuff from vaccines. I don't want to get too crazy and conspiratorial about everything, but there could be things that happen biologically in the brain, and of course, I mean, that's not not always the case. But what I'm just saying is, it's just a huge spectrum, even in just autism, for example, where you can be highly, what is it called? It's highly, you could go all the way from very verbal and almost appear to be relatively social, to all the way to nonverbal. And that whole spectrum of autism is a very big classification that is used for some of the special needs populations, becoming more prevalent. People, I forget the statistics right now, but it's, after working in in that field for 10 years, you get a kind of a sense about people's how they're, especially in young people, how important the emotional intelligence is, really centrally in terms of being being able to, as Lowell's talking about, which is embrace change, or grow, or develop socially, or even learn skills that are beyond your obsessions. So I mean, I suppose that it could apply to all of us, but in my particular study with working with children, it's something that you would notice a lot. And the neurotypical person who functions with what we call a neurotypical kind of mindset is so it's you begin to see how we're all different, even in these classifications. So it's important to know the classifications, but it's important to let go and transcend them, I suppose, at some point, and just treat people how they are, or meet them where they're at. I think that's the most loving thing that you can do.
But for this, you must be able to do that. If you have only learned in books to be a teacher, how can you become a good teacher unless you have really this big gift for it? But if nobody, if you don't learn it, your profession, how can you become good in it? I mean, somebody does, but most not. So to meet people where they are, there we need to be able to feel into them, to see the nonverbal clues, a lot of abilities we need to have, which we haven't learned by any institution. I mean,
but doesn't that bring in another one of the lines of intelligence? As a teacher, you can know your subject matter, and you can know teaching techniques and all of those things, but being able to meet somebody where they are, isn't that part of the emotional and social line? Yeah, so
I would have called it relational line.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's part of that in some way.
I thought that too, but then we talked about how I was thinking about the different intensities of relational, whether it's social, relational, or whatever. So, but whatever it is, it's that thing that our ability to connect with people in some way. Mm.
And when I have understood it right, Scott, people with whom you have worked, they are missing this social line development.
At times, and also the emotional piece too is important, because it's that, in the brain there's that reptilian part with the fight or flight. It's kind of like an on or off switch. A lot of times when there's early trauma with someone that's young, maybe they weren't, a lot of children that came from Russia, weren't properly mothered, or didn't have human touch, and they develop a condition called reactive attachment disorder. It's a fancy word for somebody who's not been mothered. So there's that whole bond that is important from the child and the mother, where so much is communicated from age 0 to 2 or 3. There's a huge developmental situation going on there, and a lot of times when a child is adopted, it's not necessarily known what's going on. Maybe through the adoption system there's some errors or something like this, or some fragmentation. But anyway, you're a parent, and you're a loving parent, and now you have a child that you've adopted with these intense outbursts and emotional explosions, and how do I parent this child? And that's the kind of kid that would come to a school that I've worked at, where there's safe structured routine, safe people, safe calm. But it's that fight or flight, Heidi, in that brain, that part of the brain there, that it's constantly being activated by somebody who's been through abuse at such a very young age. So yeah, I mean, it's like it's quite a complex situation.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
Well,
I do some work in a seniors complex care, and and it's also especially for the Chinese community, and so there's language. I'm thinking about these lines of intelligence again. There's language which seems to have disappeared for some of the Chinese elders. Maybe they didn't have English very strongly in their younger years anyway. But the one thing that we recognize that is still there is music.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And when the music therapists come in and play some of their old traditional songs, that they remember the words, they remember the melody, everything. It's just an awesome experience to see people that you know, are kind of, I mean, it looks as though they've kind of crawled back down inside themselves, down far, you know, they're very difficult to access. But boy, when that music happens, they come right out. It's just a beautiful thing to see.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. We have here one of these houses where old people come in, and after 2 weeks or 3 weeks they get mad because the mind is not stimulated at all. And one time with a group I had here with a singing course, we went up and did a concert. The problem was we didn't know too many Italian songs.
Yeah.
But the ones we knew, you know, first they were sitting like this, and then they heard the music, and it was...
Yeah, yeah.
And then they tried to sing, and some really did sing with us. It was amazing. We can do so much with music therapy. It's really...
So is that a remaining intelligence or just kind of a brain response?
Memory.
Yeah, I know that when they play music, if you put an MRI on a person's brain, the whole brain is activating, and music is one of the few. Listening to music is one of the few things that does that to the brain.
Doing music even more.
I was going to say that too, Heidi. Not just listening.
Yeah.
You got to be doing it.
That's why I have in the Plus Your Business Academy the Vedic singing, because singing, also I don't sing anymore so much and don't teach at the moment, but I think I have to take it up again, because this is sort of a brain conservation
for you
thing.
Huh?
No, for everybody. There are researchers on elderly people, not old people, who have shown that singing is most igniting the brain functions, because it's not only right brain, you know, it's doing this. As you said, Scott, it is music is using all the brain, and you can keep your memory by singing. I mean, the even more difficult thing for the brain is playing on first sight organ, because you have to use all fingers and the feet and translate immediately from what you see into all these different movements. Yeah. For me, I cannot imagine, you know, how anybody can do that. But that seems to be the most complex task for human brains.
Really? Well, I was just as we're speaking about music, my involvement with music is in a choir, a community choir. That is, there are anywhere from 300 to 400 people in this community choir. So it is not only the act of actually singing and you know, reacting to the vibrations and all of that, but because it's a community choir, it's also this social relational thing happening. And singing in a choir at all is a social relational thing. And I would almost say there's an emotional piece and a spiritual piece. There are all kinds of things that happen when you sing in a community choir.
Absolutely.
I hadn't really thought about it quite from this angle before. It's kind of neat.
Yeah, but it's really one of the best things people could do when they have a little bit of time. But singing today is, men don't react very much on that. Sometimes women, as you do. In the academy, the main responses were from women, and men think this is too much.
And besides, I can't sing.
Girlish.
Yeah.
No,
well,
and in the
Mark, let me tell you, this community choir is based on the notion everyone can sing.
Oh, I was
And
joking too.
3/4 of the people in that choir have been told somewhere in their life they cannot sing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is exactly people with whom I worked a lot. I mean, a lot. The difficulty is to get them into your lessons because they are so convinced that they cannot sing that they wouldn't even come. But I had some of them, and they could sing at the end. And I found out that it is mostly psychological, and then because they have always believed that it is. And then the thing is, it became true, because they never really practice it. So when they open their mouth, they take a wrong sound, because they don't even bother to listen which one they should take. They only under stress, I have to sing something, and yeah, and something comes out, you know. But it's not, and you can learn that in adult age. And this is a long time was one of my missions to do that, but I gave up because I didn't reach the people who wanted to learn that. I mean, I had some. One who was playing the mandolin, and with him, this was very interesting. With him, I found out that he thought singing is like playing mandolin. You just do something different, you know. And so he intervals, no, a third, for instance. He had no idea how a third sounds, but he just thought something and did another sound. So until I got that he had, first of all, a completely different imagination how sound works and singing works, you know, in the sense of perceiving the pitches, because you don't have them on the instrument. You know? And then the re-education to listen, first listen, and then try out, and then you get the right sound. And at the end, he could play with his group and sing with his group. And before, they said, do be silent, you know.
Well, our choir masters, there are two of them. They're the way they describe it is learning to sing is not about what's going on in your throat or all that. It's your ability to listen.
Mainly.
And it's all about that. So what they recommend for somebody who's new is to stand in the group and surround themselves with the others who can sing, and just be there and listen and listen and listen and listen until you feel like opening your mouth and doing the same. And it's amazing how it works.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. So now, is listening another intelligence?
I was thinking too. The ability to be receptive. This, I think, this is an intelligence.
Definitely different than just hearing.
Yes.
Hearing and listening are two different things.
Yep.
Yeah.
I listen to you, but I don't hear you.
So you had to. Anyway, I would be curious, Lawrence, if with some of your procedures you could do something in these cases. I mean,
well, we choose a specific example, then we can consider it.
For instance, what Scott was talking about with children, and often they are not children anymore, no? They are already grown-ups when they are in this...
This reactive stage?
No, in this... how did we call this cat? I always forget the autistic cat. Yes, autistic cat. Yeah.
There he is.
It's a pussycat.
Yeah, he's quite autistic in his behavior. So, would there be a possibility to maybe in a different form, in a more understandable form, to do something for them?
Well, as far as autistic individuals, what little I understand of it, because I have never personally worked with one, but I've done some reading, and what I have read is that they are poorly coordinated. Their movements are so poorly coordinated, they have a very dim kinesthetic sense, very dim body sense. And so their repetitive movements are primitive ways of developing a familiar sensation to get something stable in their sense of movement and position and location in space. So that would be perhaps a kinesthetic intelligence for which nothing else can substitute. That would be a way in terms of somatic education, clinical somatic education. What's going on in autistic people, though, has very much to do with attention. Their attention is internalized heavily. Right, Scott?
Yeah, definitely from the neck up.
Okay, so that goes along with the diminution of kinesthetic awareness.
Exactly.
And so I would say the very first step would be to get that online. Get movement intelligence going, kinesthetic intelligence, and in so doing, they would have to discipline their attention. You can't develop a kinesthetic ability without attention being applied to it. And for that matter, intention applied to it. In the beginning, it might be a little difficult to take that little grain of intentionality that they have and grow it to the point where they can deliberately apply intention to their learning process. But I just said learning process, and right away we're into two other functions, imagination and memory. We remember things by deliberately imagining them. If you want to learn a phone number, what you do is imagine the sequence of numbers again and again and again until it becomes consolidated and you have a memory. So we've right away identified the four fundamental faculties, attention, intention, memory, and imagination, applied in specific ways. So I think with autism there would be the matter of identifying where the weak or undeveloped faculties are, and then approaching it as a four-part task, getting attention, exercising an intention, and imagining sufficiently to form a memory.
That was that really helped me understand those four aspects, even way way better than I have up until now. So thank you for that.
Yeah, this is, to me, it becomes clearer and clearer and clearer. And also what you say at the beginning, that reality, living beings have these, and it seems a little bit, but it becomes clearer and clearer.
Well, I go back to what I said earlier. See if we can find an exception. Can there be any living being has no capacity for attention?
I think so.
Maybe someone who's asleep.
No, you are attentive too.
I think that's a valid point, Mark. In terms of those four faculties, there is a spectrum of activation. Oh, a little musical intelligence there.
Sorry, I forgot to turn my phone off.
So what happens in the waking state, memory is very much activated because we recognize everything in our experience according to what we remember. If you're looking at your computer screen, you remember it's something to look at, right? There's got to be memory in it. The waking state is much more on the memory side, and as we know, the other faculties are awake there too. In dreaming, memory abates or sinks into dormancy much more, and dreams are much more on the imagination side. You still have to remember that there's something to pay attention to in the dream, if you're going to pay attention to it, but mostly it's running so much on automatic, unless you're awake, lucidly dreaming, that things pass before you in the dream state without any ability on your part deliberately to place your attention on something and hold it there. Which, by the way, I made mention of Carlos Castaneda's lineage earlier in another broadcast. That's one of the major things they teach, is fixing attention in the dream state.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So that's fine for waking and dreaming. But what about the deep sleep or causal state?
Yeah.
And that's described as a subsidence. And it's a subsidence of all the faculties.
Yeah.
As soon as you exercise attention in the causal state, you're also exercising intention to exercise you intend to exercise attention, and there's something that you're remembering to attend to. So you've gone all the way from causal into the subtle state.
Uh-huh.
So even though you were joking, Mark, it seems that when those four faculties subside, all individuated consciousness subsides also, and what we're left with is the formless ground of being, which has no qualities whatsoever. But it isn't annihilation. It's simply lack of definition. So attention does not anchor any place and can't anchor any place in the deep sleep state. If it did, you'd be dreaming or you'd be awake.
Yeah.
But isn't it that what enlightenment is, when you are in these deep states and you can keep them while you are awake?
Well, that gets to another teaching about what constitutes enlightenment.
Yeah, then generally what they say, it's go to the non-dual something. That would, you have to do all these states experiences and to causal and non-dual, and that when you say that would mean that there is no attention, no intention, no memory. But Wilbur himself, he said he was 2 weeks in this state and was sort of aware of everything, you know.
Well, the non-dual state is not the absence of specific experiences in this moment. Non-dual is, there's no distinction between the waking, the dreaming, and the sleep, and that which witnesses waking, dreaming, and sleep. There's no concept formation that's giving primacy or favoring any of those. Whereas in the person who has no discipline or development whatsoever, they're pretty much stuck in the waking state. They have little capacity for interior awareness. So dream state is not particularly accessible to them consciously, happens on automatic. And that's one of the big things that's missed in the teaching, in Wilbur's teaching, is the difference between automaticity and voluntary experience. Automaticity is given by the mere fact of birth, but that's not full incarnation, because a person hasn't developed their faculties by virtue of birth. They continually develop those faculties or those intelligences over the course of a lifetime, and that is incarnation. The awakening of the
embodiment.
So in terms of enlightenment, I go back to what Adi Da taught, 7 stages of life, and that enlightenment is not the exclusion of all experience. That's the 6th stage. He refers to that as the 6th stage error, because it's still dualistic. It's formless versus form. Dualism.
Yes.
In the non-dual condition, we recognize that form is made up of formlessness. Formlessness congeals. I have to say it a little different way here. Now, I have a different take on gross, subtle, and causal than Wilbur and his group have been promoting. Theirs is the very traditional understanding of bodies. You have 3 bodies. You have a gross waking body, a flesh body. You have a subtle body, which is, some call it a light body or energy body, and the formless causal, which really isn't a body because it doesn't have a limit or a center. It doesn't have a location, even though they call it causal. A body implies something you can locate. So what my interior explorations have revealed is that the causal state is it's undifferentiated. It has no form to it. It's a field, and within that field, little seeds, you might say, form. where attention and intention, memory and imagination gather, first in very fine, subtle form, and those little forms aggregate or gather together to form larger scale patterns of organization. And he uses the hierarchy, the holarchy, says that quarks become subatomic particles, become atoms, become molecules, and letters become words, become paragraphs, become statements, you might say, or maybe a thesis. It's the fine integrating into larger and larger coherent systems, which then integrate with other systems the way a man and woman integrate together and they become a relationship. So there aren't separate bodies. What there are different scales of organization from simple to more and more complex. And that the gross is simply the densest, most complex, and most enduring form that's created from subtle patterns. Those subtle patterns are different attributes. And those subtle patterns are made up of something even finer, the way atoms are made up of quarks. So it isn't that there are different bodies, but that there are different degrees or scales of integration. And we see that in the cosmos. The cosmos starts out with very, very, very simple forms, these subatomic particles, and they aggregate to atoms, and those atoms become molecules, and the molecules congeal from gravity into cosmic bodies, whether stars or planets, which aggregate to be galaxies. You see what I'm saying? It's integration from tiny, tiny, tiny into groups of tiny that form an organized system of some sort, whether it's a subatomic particle that has... Okay, Scott.
Sorry, Lawrence. I got to get going.
I gotcha.
Yeah, okay. Bye-bye, everybody.
Have I said enough to get the point across here? That the bodies don't exist as bodies. They're really just different degrees of complexity and organization formed of simpler forms.
Okay. Now.
Yeah, I do understand what you're saying, and I think it's actually easier to understand than Wilbur's idea of bodies. So.
Yeah, because it's Vedanta, but he has the old traditional.
That is, he does have a traditional approach.
But my question was, when you have no memory and no intention, no attention, and imagination in deep sleep, for instance, how can you be aware then in deep sleep? And
well, okay, let me take my closest approximation of that. When I have done gold key release to the point where there's a dissolution.
We have to say goodbye also to Lowell. We become a little bit out of
we're going
topic.
On.
Yeah. Also.
Thank you very much for coming, Lowell.
Been here.
It's been great.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Okay, just a moment, and then we stop. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So it has to do again with this non-dual condition. Obviously, if there is someone who is intuiting the formless causal and able to talk about it later, there was some subtle field of attention and some memory going on.
Yes.
But the memory is not identical to the formless intuition. The memory is more like just making note that there was an apparent period of dissolution, although you never know how long it was. You know, right? Time is gone. There's no sense of time anymore. There's just a formless, qualityless, motionless, moveless, centerless, boundless field intuition that is reflected into a somatic experience as a memory. Oh yeah, there was that, but which can't recreate the experience by remembering it.
True.
So then it would be a case of the formless ground of being self-intuiting. And since we are all part of that field, we are all specific or special case locations or perspectives, being a person, we are at once the field, which is formless, and the particular self formation. That is the non-dual again, because we are not only a physical form, we are not only the formless, and we're not one or the other. We are continuous with both, with no line that we can draw that says where one ends and the other begins.
Yeah.
So in one of the pieces I wrote, I said that the witness is continuous and fades into mystery.
Yeah, that's the theme in your teachings, this fading away, the vaporizing, the endless gradations.
I think we stop our broadcast now with that.
Yeah.
Thank you for this explanation. It was a bit out of topic, but it was interesting.
It was good.
Thank you.
Yep,
See you next week.
Illustrate a line of development.